Hello friends and welcome. Today we're going to talk about late game decision making. I'm going to give you a rough flowchart to try to make it easier to figure out what you should do, since I hear a lot of questions about getting lost as the game drags on. Guest speaker Jupiter here would like to mention that a lot of what we're about to cover is useful and great, blah blah blah, it's my own video, whatever, but the map awareness and information gathering is actually a key part of the late game. You can't really use this flowchart if you don't have any information to work with. And actually through coachings and replay analyses, I found that many people arrive at the correct decision when I kind of prompt them and give them like something like, this hero's here, this hero's here, what might be a good thing to do. A lot of people reach the right conclusions. It's just that they didn't recognize that they had that information available to them. So if you think that might be your issue, you need a like a map awareness video somewhere around here or something, somewhere where I pop it up. So maybe check that one out. It might help you improve the habits to gather information. It's easier than ever now. You can click like the top bar to check enemy hero items, things like that. So gathering the information will allow you to then make the decisions that we're about to talk about. I want to start by remembering that the ultimate goal of this game is to destroy the enemy base. And that may seem obvious and unnecessary to say, but I think a lot of people get caught up in their head of, Dota's a super complicated game, there's a million different interactions, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, it's true, but at the end of the day, as you make it towards the late game, no matter how the game has progressed up to this point, there's actually, in my opinion, only a few overarching concepts that your team will work towards in order to actually close out a game, and that helps to keep it simple. Now, of course, the particular nuances of how you would go about that in a given game, that could be then the infinite complexities. But again, this video is meant to give you a general direction to start working towards. There will be exceptions, of course, like that's what we're saying, Dota's a complicated game, but if you just roughly follow this, if you're feeling lost in the late game, then you're going to be in a good spot. Destroying the enemy base is actually quite simple if the base is empty and no one is defending it. If you've never seen the Dota 2 speedrun, it's how fast you can end the game in an empty lobby, and from spawning into the game to destroying the enemy base, it takes less than 10 minutes. So it's actually a very simple affair, but of course the enemy is going to try to defend their base, unless they're not in the base. So that's kind of our first option, is ratting and split pushing. The goal here is to not interact with the enemies, and when they are distracted by something else happening somewhere else, you go in towards their base, starting from like the tier 1, tier 2, eventually the tier 3 barracks, all of that. You slowly start pushing things away from the enemy team and not interacting with them. Ratting comes with some amount of risk because you are pushing into enemy territory, most likely on your own, and they can always defensively teleport to defend their base and try to get you. So there's a couple things that'll make this easier for you, that if your team has any of these heroes, you're more likely to try to engage in ratting or split pushing, such as if you have summons or illusions, you can send those forward to the danger while you stay back in the jungle, the fog of war, and it's just safer for you while still mostly accomplishing the same stuff. If you have some kind of teleportation ability like Nature's Prophet or Dawnbreaker, then you can be avoiding the enemy team pushing out this other lane, but then, my team is getting involved in a fight, I'm not there to help. Oh wait, yes I am, because I have the teleportation ability. Or the other way, you engage in a fight, whether you win or you lose, you immediately leave that fight to go push another part of the map where the enemy team is not, because they were just engaged in the fight that just happened. If you have high mobility or some kind of escape, so heroes like Ember Spirit, Weaver, Anti-Mage, these kind of difficult to catch heroes can really just push lanes and you go to try to stop them, but then, they're gone already. If you also just have really good survivability, so you are tanky or you have some kind of like debuff immunity, so heroes like Timbersaw, Lifestealer, Juggernaut, as long as the enemies don't have like some kind of BKB piercing ability, you can usually push, they caught me, I'm just going to spin, teleport out, and they can't really stop me. I know I said the ultimate goal here is to take buildings without engaging, but tower damage is actually a little bit optional here, because any hero can rat or split push, even if you don't have any of the things I just talked about. As long as you use the fog of war and you damage the enemy creeps a little bit, you will push your creeps towards the enemy base, and your creeps, plus maybe some of your auto attacks, will whittle down the buildings. It may not be really fast, but, one creep wave uncontested, 10%, 20% of the tower might fall, depending which, building you are fighting at that point. So you don't have to have tower damage, but it's a lot more threatening if you do have tower damage, because Crystal Maiden pushing my tier 3. We got like 2 minutes before we can address that. Oh, Shadow Shaman just dropped Serpent Wards. Like, we have to be there or we're about to lose barracks. So we gotta go like right now. So the more tower damage you have, the more threatening your split push is, but it's not strictly required. Because either way, the enemy team should feel that pressure to defend, whether it's because they're missing a bunch of gold that is being pushed into their base, or because their base is actually being threatened to destroyed. They should have to come back to their half of the map, which will buy time for your team as people are falling back to defensive positions. They're going to have to push out again. So you get a lot of space to maneuver for your team when you split push, even if you don't successfully take any buildings. By the way, if you struggle to deal with ratting when the enemy does it, one of the ways you can deal with it is to set up a trap. So the mistake most people make is that when anti-mage begins hitting your tier 3s, you go, oh no, we're being ratted, we gotta go deal with this. That's too late. You have to see him pushing down a lane that he's making his way over, that you suspect it's going to happen, and then you start getting in position. To do this, having instant catch will help a lot because many of the ratting heroes will be difficult to catch, so somehow being able to blink and instantly stun and disable them to then allow the chain stun to get them killed off really helps, and then to actually catch them, you're probably going to need vision, so some kind of ward somewhere in your jungle. Like I said, if they're already at the building hitting it, that's a little bit too late. You need to know that they're on the way, and that's what the wards will help a lot with. Alternatively, you could just ignore them and go for a bigger prize. This one is a little bit risky, but it depends on the exact situation that is happening. But if they're pushing your tier 1, you can just ignore it and take their tier 2. That's probably a better prize. Or they're hitting your tier 3s, they're going to threaten the barracks, but it's going to take them 1 minute to do so. Since they're not with their team, you can force their barracks in 30 seconds and then TP home and defend, and maybe you lost a tier 3 in one barracks, but you ended up with the bigger prize. So this is kind of difficult to call in the heat of the moment. This has the more experience you have, the easier it is to kind of judge how risky it is to go for this method, but it is one way you can do. A lot of people do often like TP home when they shouldn't, and then they eventually get whittled down because they never do building damage because they're constantly TPing home to deal with rats, but they could have actually pushed faster than one single hero split pushing on their own. The base might also be empty because the enemy heroes are all dead. At that point, I don't have a fancy term for it, you should just be pushing the base. This is a really common mistake that after a fight, people get scared because like, oh, I'm really low, I better fall back, or, I better, jungle to finish this item now, but no one's alive, no one's gonna stop you, you could have 10 health, but no one's gonna kill you because the creeps have a very structured aggro system, the tower has a structured aggro system, so as long as you let the creeps go in front, or maybe even allied heroes first, you're not going to be killed, you can push, and then go home as the enemies start to respawn. There are, of course, exceptions here, but just as a general rule, off of a winning fight, you should be looking to push, and you have to come up with reasons why I can't push because whatever. But if I can't come up with reasons, then I'm going to go push a lane. Now, getting the enemy heroes killed off is actually the hard part of this, so now let's talk about that. What if the enemies are alive and defending their base? How do we go about beating them? So if we are outside the base, we can look for a team fight or a pickoff. If you get any amount of kills, this will then lead to the enemies being dead, and then you get to push. This is one of the most common situations for late game Dota, so a rough game plan to follow here is that you're going to camp in area. Where you pick is a little bit up to you. Roshan's next spawn side is pretty much the best. It's what you'll see all the pros do. Pubs tend to not even care about Roshan. So at that point, pick whatever lane you want to push the most. So, oh, we already took the tier 3 bottom, so I want to keep pushing that, so camp the bottom side of the map. Maybe you already took the bottom lane, so okay, top tower and mid tower are all the ones left, so you're going to camp the top half of the map. Something like that. It doesn't really matter too much. Pick an area and set up superior ward vision there. That means putting a bunch of sentries to make sure the enemies can't see in there, and then you set up something. You can do cliff wards that give you really good vision. If you don't want to do that, that's okay too. But this is where you can do that because you're going to be in that area to defend it, even though it's a super obvious ward spot. And they don't know if you're in that area or not because you have removed all of their wards via sentries or maybe even a gem purchase in the late game. So they don't know when they can go into that area you're camping. Now for the area you're not camping, you want to set up some deep wards, and you want these to be really difficult to find. So you don't want to stick these on the cliffs. There's a really common mistake to just use only cliff wards. That's its own mistake, but especially in the late game, the like triangle cliff ward and then another cliff ward in the other jungle. You're like, oh, we're gonna protect the whole area. It's not possible to protect the whole area. Your team is going to be split too far apart, and you are going to be the ones being picked off. That's why you want to camp the one area, and you have these deep wards everywhere else, so that you can get a rough idea when the enemy team leaves their base. That is when, you know, part of the topic here, picking off out of the base. I gotta know when they leave the base, when they're farming a random jungle. That is gonna give me the information I need to then head over for the pickoff. While you're camping an area, you want to make sure you're keeping 2 lanes pushed in. So if you're camping the bottom half of the map, push in the mid and the bottom lane. Don't literally go up to the tier 3 tower and start hitting it. No, that's a different topic that we're going to get into. You're just pushing in the lane so that your creeps make it to the enemy base, but you yourself don't have to. When your creeps make it to the tier 3s, they're going to whittle down the towers for you unless an enemy hero defends it, and that is going to be part of our information gathering. Who is in the base, who is maybe not in the base that I haven't seen in a while and might be somewhere else out there. When you see those heroes who are out of the base, this is when you want the smokes ready. You want to smoke from that area you're camping and then just bolt to wherever they are. Somewhere your deep ward scouted them, maybe you scanned it, maybe you decided, okay, Roshan spawned, it's time to go do that. You know, whatever it is, when the moment happens, you want to go quick. So smokes for pickoffs. If it's Roshan, you can probably just walk into that if you think it's safe enough to do so. If it's not safe enough to do so, you want to continue just camping an area until you find that pickoff, or you think they're not coming here, so we can like start to go for Rosh. And as part of that, it is risky, but that's why the fact that you have camped the Rosh side and you have the vision superiority, you will have the advantage in the team fight that breaks out if they are coming to contest. A couple more tips before we move on. Try to cut waves rather than go all the way home if you're camping an area. This is most likely to apply to that last lane that we're not keeping shoved in. It's going to slowly make its way to our base. If your carry is pushing in the mid wave and then suddenly they show up in the top lane, the enemy team knows that they teleported home and that you are now split up as a team, and they're going to push into the area that you are camping, and you're going to lose all your wards. You're going to lose a team fight if you try to hold it because you don't have your carry, or you don't have your mid, or someone left, and that's no good. So rather than have to go all the way home, what your team should do is from your camped area, kind of push together as a team through that mid lane to that other lane, cut that creep wave that has just spawned, and then quickly make your way back to that camped area to again continue to protect it. And then you can make this movement again as the next creep wave spawns. And this is how you kind of keep all 3 lanes pushed in without spreading yourself constantly across the map, which will open you up to being picked off. How far apart is too far apart? Try using this principle that most fights in the late game where people have blink hexes, Abyssals, the E-Blade Daggons, Divine Rapiers, Daedalus, all this is coming out, so much damage all at once that many fights will be determined in a single second. That very first second could get a hero killed off, you're immediately at a disadvantage and you can't take the rest of the fight. So when you are looking at your team, just imagine, if this guy gets jumped, can I instantly save him? Can I use my defensive abilities? Can I counter initiate? Can I start jumping their backline? You know, whatever role you're playing, if you can't react within 1 second, you're probably too far apart and you are at risk. The final concept I want you to keep in mind is that it only takes about 30 seconds to walk from the Radiant base to the Dire base. Of course, it depends on exactly what lane you're in, blah, 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 but that's about how long it takes for the creeps to go from the mid lane, from your tier 3 to the enemy tier 3. And the reason this is important is that this is why it doesn't matter where we fight in the late game. What matters is that we find a good fight in the late game, because wherever it happens, even if it is in our own base, as far as possible from the enemy base, or maybe it happens in the top jungle and then we have to TP home and then push, it will take you about 30 seconds to do so. And that amount of time is not that much when we're talking in the late game and death timers are 60, 90, 125 seconds, right? That means after the fight, you can go home, you can heal, you can start pushing, and by the time you make it to the enemy base, you've probably still got at least like 30 seconds at the least where some hero is dead and you can try to take some buildings or at least whittle them down before they respawn, fortify, buyback, stuff like that. If you're trying to push the enemy base while they're still alive, that's what we're going to call sieging the base. It could be a full 5-on-5, but sometimes you find a pick off and then you still feel like sieging because maybe the hero you killed isn't the carry, you know, it's like a support. So I feel good about being 5 versus 4, but you know, maybe they could buy back. So I still want to respect the danger of it. Then you siege the base rather than like throw caution to the wind and all rush the base. Most Dota players don't have the discipline nor the patience to siege correctly, but if they did, they would win a lot more Dota games that are very straightforward to close out. When you go to siege an enemy base, one hero attacks the buildings. This could be someone who is really long ranged and is as far out of the enemy base as possible, like Sniper, Drow, Lina with Dragonlance, right? They're just so far back, it's difficult for the enemies to get to without actually leaving their base. It could be someone really tanky, like Timbersaw or Medusa. It's like, yeah, you can jump me, but like, I'm really tanky and I'm not really gonna care, and I'm just gonna do a bunch of damage when you get to me. Let them chip the buildings. It could be people with a lot of survivability and mobility. Again, like Lifestealer, Juggernaut, walk up with your debuff immunity, hit the building for a little bit, and then back out. Everybody else on the team should stand behind that hero, scattered a little bit, like one person's behind this tree, another person's behind that tree, one guy is just far back in the lane, right? It depends on the cast ranges and all of that, but only one hero needs to hit the building, and this hero will often have the Aegis. This is part of why doing Roshan is really good, that if that hero does get jumped and instantly killed, they're gonna respawn, and the abilities the enemies had to use to instantly kill that hero, they're all on cooldown, and you can now take a fight with your full resources available because you have the Aegis. Now, in terms of, oh, they keep killing the creeps so we can't push, that's what the banner's really good for. That'll start spawning with the second Roshan kill, and so you place that in front of the enemy buildings, and they have to come deal with that banner, which will drag them out of the base, and if they don't want to do that, they stay in their base, well then your creeps are going to stay immune to damage, and they're going to help you whittle down the tower to then eventually chip it away. Sieging the base takes time, and that's why so many people screw up, but if you actually look at it, people push with one given creep wave, they attack for a little bit, they get 50% of the tower, which means if they just did it again one more time, the tower would die, but teams very often just scatter after like, oh, our creep wave's dead, the push is over, they all just leave, or some guy's like, oh, I can't stand it anymore, I gotta go, and he just jumps in, like he sees an enemy hero, can't stop himself, just instantly blinks, initiates, and now your team is forced to dive in under the tower that is still alive. You all get hit by the fortified split shots, it gets all messy, but all you have to do is just keep sieging the base very slowly, very safely. It's not the most exciting thing, I get that, but it is the safest way to take the enemy base and force them to come to you rather than you going to them. Doing that would be team fighting inside the enemy base. I have this in red because it is the most dangerous option that every pub player wants to go for right away. They don't care about any of these other options. They want to go straight to team fighting in the enemy base because they think they're ahead, but they vastly underestimate the defensive power of being in your own base. You have the tier 3s and tier 4s helping you to do damage, giving you bonus armor, bonus HP regen. You have the fountain nearby for, throwing out spells, running home, healing, coming straight back out. Buybacks are right there. You could be TPing into multiple different angles. You have the high ground. There's so many reasons that the static power of the base plus the dynamic power of the heroes as they've been scaling throughout the game, that is really hard to break. Even if you have a 10, 20k lead and team fights outside the base are really easy, those same team fights inside the base will be much harder. The only time you should really go for a team fight inside the enemy base is because you have a massive gold lead over the enemy team, which most pub players will vastly overestimate how far ahead and how strong they are. So they get this wrong and then they throw away the entire gold lead. For pro teams, you actually really only see this situation in the first 25 minutes. Even though this is like a late game video, the level of lead, the relative power spike you need to have over the enemy team is something you will see more often in the early game because you have picked early game heroes, you're building auras, you have zoo heroes, and Dota scaling is kind of funny where survivability is easier to build in the early game and it kind of outscales damage because damage is more exponential, where damage eventually hits that tipping point and survivability never breaks past it again. So that is why in the early game, if you have a good lead, they just literally don't have the damage to kill you and you can do this kind of dive. But eventually they will have the damage. No matter what you have built, when heroes focus you down in their own base, they will kill you. That is why most pro teams rarely ever do a full dive inside the enemy base because they understand and respect that, unless someone has screwed up positioning. So there are often key heroes involved in a team fight, such as an Enigma with a big black hole preventing you from getting proper fights, a save hero who's sitting super far back. If that hero slips too far forward, they're out of position, and you can just jump them and kill them, and then the fight is over at that point, well, then you are kind of good to go. You can jump to commit in the enemy base because you're winning the fight in that moment. And the question you should be asking yourself before you do that is, will we win the fight in the first 6 seconds? I'm using 6 seconds because that is how long BKB lasts at its the least duration, which is what happens as the game drags on and on. So you see that key target, you think it's the key target, you think you're really strong. When you jump and you press BKB, will the fight be done when the BKB is over? Because if it's not, and you now have to leave the enemy base with no BKB, you're going to be slowed and stunned, and people are going to buy back, and they're going to mess with you, and you're not getting out of the base at that point, and you're going to die. And if you are pushing this hard into the enemy base, you could be throwing a serious gold lead. If we are talking about a late game fight where you get wiped in the enemy's base, potentially then losing Roshan or losing towers, because like I said, only takes 30 seconds to walk from base to base. So if you throw in their base, they can make it to your base to take buildings, all the farming they're going to do, the power runes, all of that. It can be a 10 to 20k gold swing in a single losing fight, depending how bad that fight goes. And that is why pub teams are like, we're so ahead, we're winning, whatever. You throw once, you're back to an even game in a lot of situations. And now you have to earn the victory all over again. And that's why you gotta be so careful about choosing this final option when there's a lot of other things you can do instead to win the game. You may have noticed that this flowchart is organized in roughly the relative power advantage you have over the enemy team. Now, I didn't want to just call this a net worth lead. That's kind of what we use colloquially, just because it's easiest. Yeah, this team's 20k up over the enemy team, they're ahead, but it is more than that. It is ability cooldowns, it is levels, it is death timers, buyback timers, pickoffs, who is actually alive versus dead, what objectives are available, Aegis, Roshan, banner, stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that factor into this that make this is the part that gets complicated in the late game Dota. But if you know your team is really behind, you're more likely to go for these options at the bottom. And if you're ahead, you're more likely to go for the options towards the top. That is not always 100% true. There are reasons that any team could be doing any of these things, but I just try to give you guys general rules like through these videos, and then you have to kind of come up with a nuance over time as you play more Dota. So that is the general rule I want to give you guys. The further behind you are the enemy team, you're going to start at the bottom of this page and move your way up. There's actually 2 more options I do need to give you guys. I didn't want to include these to start because the ones on the page right now they're the things you should actively work towards in most situations. But there are times you should actually be AFK farming. I know that has a really bad connotation in Dota. It's like, oh, this guy's just AFK, he's not doing anything, all he does is farm, farm, farm. But there are times it is good to do that. Those times would typically be waiting for a relative power spike. So this could be something like a key item. It's a world of difference to have an ogre axe, a mithril hammer, and then 1400 gold versus waiting 30 more seconds and having a finished BKB. It's a huge boost in power to finish the item. So a little bit of AFK farming while you wait for those items that are close to finish could be huge. Ability cooldowns, you won the fight because you black holed 2 heroes. Now you don't have black hole. If you get into another fight because they buy back, you don't have that tool anymore. You're not very strong. So maybe you do have to just sit around and wait for those abilities to come back up. Maybe you, instead of the level 2 black hole, you want the level 3 black hole. So you might be close to a level. It might be like a level 20 talent, 25 talent, something that's going to really change the way a hero works. You want to wait for that. Death timers. Not only, your teammates might be dead, but it could also be your buyback timer that I almost have buyback in another minute if I die and then they rush down our base because it only takes 30 seconds to walk from base to base. They would kill us before I could buy back again. So maybe we want to chill a little bit, risk our lives in a minute where if we do throw, I could then buy back and still fight. You might also wait for Roshan and Tormentors. This is not going to happen very often in a lot of pubs, but if Roshan is going to spawn in 10 seconds, there's no need to go risk yourself in an aggressive push. Just wait for Roshan, take the fight around Roshan, get all the goodies, the Aegis, the banner, cheese, refresher, and then push with that. That's going to be so much extra power. You got a refresh, you got an extra life, all this stuff. It's really good. So you want to time like when you push the enemy base with some of these power spikes. And if you don't have them, then you're going to AFK farm. The final option that you never intentionally go for this, but you have to recognize when you need to do this, and you must do this, it's the full reset. You're playing absolute safety mode, no risks whatsoever. That might include no farming. You might all be sitting in your base. You might be sitting in your fountain. You are just waiting. If AFK farming is waiting for a relative bump in power spike, the full reset is waiting for a massive power spike. It is so massive that if you try to engage without it, you are very likely to lose if one more mistake happens. And that is the severity I want you to recognize the situation for, is because so many pub players just, it's like, oh yes, things aren't great right now, but like, you know, I can take a little bit more risk. Like I can go for this farm camp. I can get like 100 more gold and I will lose the game if things go badly. Like that doesn't make any sense. Why would you take that risk? 100 gold or lose the game? That's a terrible option. So when you properly recognize the danger of the situation, that will help you realize, like, I just should not be doing any of this stuff. I just need to wait for this huge power spike. Now, what could that power spike be? It's not really a new thing. It is returning to your old power, and the most common cause is due to staggered death timers. So for example, your carry dies. They're dead 80 seconds. Oh, okay, that's rough. But once the carry's back, we're good to go. In fact, we have a 10k gold lead, but without our carry, we are technically, behind. We're actually, we're missing like 20k gold lead, so we're the ones 10k behind in what would be a 5 versus 4 fight. That's no good. So we should not engage. And then so many people will see their tier 2 hit and go, yeah, we should defend a tier 2. You don't lose if the tier 2 falls, but you will lose if 3 more heroes die because you're engaging in a 5 versus 4 fight without your carry, and now your carry respawns and they don't have 3 of their teammates. Now they can't defend the tier 3 and they try and they die, and now what should have just been like a carry death losing a tier 2 has snowballed into just completely losing the game. There are players who recognize the danger, like, okay, we gotta wait for the people to respawn, I should be careful. But towers are not safe anymore. And a lot of people have this false sense of security standing under a tier 2 tower, a tier 3 tower, even the tier 4 towers. If we're talking about late game Dota, people will tank the towers for 30 seconds and not care. They're gonna pop Satanic and heal full. They're gonna kill you in 2 seconds and then get back out of the towers, right? They just don't care about that stuff. So it's not, I'm standing under safety. I need to be standing completely out of reach of the enemy team if I'm trying to play in this ultra safe mode. And that's why I mentioned, like, you might literally be in your fountain waiting there, because that is something that most enemy teams will still respect to some degree. But we have seen the fountain diving, right? Sometimes they are just that far ahead, and then you have to be like somewhere else on the map ready to TP home. I don't know, that's getting real out there, right? But you just have to be really careful, and you have to give up buildings. Like, you made a mistake, there is a price to pay for that. Many people just are trying to have their cake and eat it too, where it's like, yeah, my carry messed up, yeah, I messed up and did a really bad ultimate, but I still want to protect my buildings. Like, no, you're really behind now. You have to lose the building. You have to lose the building as a way to buy time for your ability to come back up, for your carry to respawn, and then you can fight. The game is going to be harder because maybe you lost your mid barracks, but at least you get to keep playing the game and you can win from behind, even though you have lost a mid lane, you've lost your bottom lane. You can completely lose megas, you can lose all your tier 4s, but as long as the Ancient is alive, you can fight to win. But if you all snowball deaths and they just take the Ancient while you're all dead, then you can't play the game anymore. So you have to be willing to give up non-essential buildings, and the only essential building in the game is the Ancient. If you don't do this, you will lose. You will lose, you will lose, you will lose. I really want that to hit home, guys. You have to recognize the losing of the game versus whatever you are trying to do. And you just have to weigh that in your head. Is it worth risking the loss of the game for this extra creep? Should I push one more wave or lose the game, right? You just need that level of danger to really properly assess what you are about to do. And I think if you do that, that will help you know when you should be playing way more safe, and you won't be giving up free losses because you just died when your carry was 10 seconds from respawning. Most of you probably already get the idea, but to quickly summarize the philosophy and mentality that you want to have in the late game, it's that as long as you're looking to get the advantage in some way, you're probably in the right direction. You don't want to take an honest 5-on-5. We're dishonest people. You want some kind of upper hand advantage so that you don't risk throwing. I mean, there's always some risk, but you minimize that risk of throwing the game away to your opponents, the most common way being to outnumber the enemy, either from the pickoffs that I mentioned in that flowchart, or this is why you might rat to make them maneuver around the map and you go faster. So instead of 5-on-5 in their base, it's 5-on-3 in their jungle, which then leads to 5-on-2 in their base. This is the easiest, the most common way, usually done by accident in pub games where people just happen to run into each other and one side wins or not. You want to intentionally do this to look for ways to outnumber your opponents. You could do this by having Aegis or having buybacks. This is essentially the extra lives. The Aegis is safer. The buybacks have a little bit more risk to it, but you want those available to you, or when the enemies don't have it available, you want to use that against them so that you can throw 7 lives into a fight where they only have 5 lives, something like that. Items and spell CDs. This is usually the big ultimates or big items like BKB Refresher. So you have like a minute to force something like Roshan or a tower. But there are also those like tinier moments like, oh, he used Blink to come into the creep wave. He doesn't have it for 10 seconds. Or this guy used Illusory Orb, so he doesn't have that extra mobility. We can jump him. Slark used Q, so he doesn't have that free Dispel on him. There are those little tiny moments where you have a few seconds to take a quick fight, which does matter a lot in the late game. Net worth is the bottom. This is what a lot of people fixate on and why I have it down here. It's not wrong, you know, if you have a Daedalus and a Butterfly and they don't, you are going to do more damage. But a lot of people fixate on this too much. Like, oh, I need 6 items before I'm ready to go. Or like, oh, I need so much money. I'm super farm, so I must win. Well, not really. You might be rich, but one carry with 20k is still going to lose to 3 heroes, even if they're all at 10k net worth, because combined they have 30k, and also they're chain stunning the carry, so he doesn't get to use any of his items. So that's why these other advantages on here are usually always more important than net worth. Of course, with an asterisk there that yes, if you have some insane net worth advantage, like in a pro match, you see like a 40k gold lead, that's usually quite good. But also why you sometimes see pro teams struggle to close out the game even with insane gold advantages, because there's more to Dota than just having net worth. And it's not the focus of this video, but I do want to quickly mention some objective priority here. In a pub game, I recognize it's really hard to direct your team, but just try to say it ahead of time. If people listen, great. If they don't, no worries. Just try to do things as a team. That's better than being totally scattered, doing 5 separate things. The first is Roshan. I know a lot of you know this, but I gotta keep saying it so that eventually it builds into the mentality. Roshan is usually the safest and easiest objective to get, especially as you get to the late game, because it's not in front of the enemy's base. It is a neutral objective, which if you are winning and have set up the map, even if you're losing and you just find a moment where you're able to get out there and get map control, it's the safest to do where people don't have the easiest teleports, kind of depending on what side of the map it is, if they have outposts, stuff like that. But that is why it's usually the transition objective, and it's a step that a lot of pub Dota players skip. They just don't think it's important enough, but they are so wrong. It is so important to get Roshan and get the Aegis and have that power advantage where you can outnumber the enemies because you have a second life and you can bait the spells on yourself. You die, you respawn, and for 90 seconds, that guy had to use an ultimate to kill you and his BKB to kill you, and you just came back, you have all your stuff, he has none of his, you kill him, he doesn't have a second life, and so then you take a bunch of objectives. So Roshan is huge. Barracks are also good, but personally, I prefer Roshan depending where the fight happens. So as a default, if you go to Roshan first, I think that would steer you right. But I admit that there are situations where maybe you wipe the enemy in front of their base, like in front of their tier 3s. I mean, yeah, we're right there. Just, you know, get the tier 3, get the barracks. But get the barracks. If it's just the tier 3 tower, if it's a tier 2 tower, that's honestly not that great. I know, you know, map pressure, you get gold, all of that. But the state of the game doesn't change that much. The tier 2 teleports are all quite close to the tier 3 teleports. The tier 3 teleports are the same as like a barracks base teleport. So in terms of where the enemies can move, it doesn't change that much. Your team gets a little bit of gold, but it just doesn't compare to creeps always pushing in because you get barracks, or because you have Roshan, you have Aegis, you have Banner, you have Refresher, Cheese. Those are huge advantages over time compared to just taking a tier 2 tower or a tier 3 tower. So after you win a fight, you can usually take Roshan because the enemy can't fortify their creep wave. They can't creep cut to stall out Roshan. It just is there. you know? So that's why you can do it safely, securely. People like to rush for barracks, but then it's like, oh, well, they fortified their tier 2. Oh, well, then they fortified their tier 3. Oh, and then they fortified their barracks, right? That's a lot to delay, and then you don't get anything, and then they respawn, you're going home, and they steal Roshan from you. So, personally, I like the Roshan first, but there are times for these other things, especially if you don't think you can get the full barracks, or even just one of the barracks, or Roshan. After about the 20-minute mark, pretty much any lineup can do Rosh, and I think that should be the first thing you go for anytime you get a sizable advantage, a window of opportunity. That should be number one on your mind. If it doesn't happen, that's okay, move on. I want to mention there is a philosophy that some people like to force the opponents to buy back and then go back to do Rosh. I disagree with that. I don't think it's not the type of idea that there's a correct way to do it or not. There are times I'm sure that is right, but as a general rule, I would recommend you do Roshan if given the window and the team is willing, all that stuff. My reasoning is that if someone is willing to buy back, it should mean that they're willing to fight. They think they can beat you. Now, sometimes that's wrong. That's a different issue. But if they're willing to buy back and fight the high ground, they're probably willing to then move towards Roshan and fight over that as well. And I have seen so many games thrown where teams try to force the buyback, lose it, and then the enemy team goes and takes Roshan. And sure, the carry has no buyback, but he also has Aegis Refresher from Roshan, and you can't kill him twice to make use of the dieback potential. So to me, when you win a fight in the late game, your initial opportunity window is probably about 60 seconds to 100 seconds, because that's like the death timers. In that time, you could do Rosh, and then extend that window where you have an advantage. Even as all of them respawn and they have all their abilities again, you have Aegis and all those various goodies, so you have at least 5 minutes of an advantage, maybe more if you have like the refresher orb that just sits there forever until you use it. So you extend it from a 60-second window to a 5-minute window, in which that time you hope to find another good fight, and then you can force buybacks and all of that, and then you might still have Aegis at that point, back off, reset, go again. But if you go for the forcing buybacks first, as soon as they buy back, that initial advantage window closes until you can get it again. Now, there's 8 minutes before they can buy back again. Yeah, but you might screw it up. I personally think it's a lot safer and a lot easier to get Roshan, and it's a lot less, it's more foolproof for the average pub player than forcing the buyback and then playing around that. The last thing I want to talk about is the Ancient. Why is it at the bottom of the list? When we started this video saying it's the most important, that is true, but I also think it's good to build up to taking the enemy Ancient. I see a lot of people try to skip some of these steps. You know, you take that first barracks and you're like, oh, we could do Rosh. Oh, we want to fight. Let's just go straight to the throne. They buy back, they kill you, they go get Rosh, stuff like that. You know, I think it is good to build up to the Ancient for most pub games where people are going to have different ideas and you're not following this straight cohesive plan. Continue to build the gold lead by getting another lane of barracks, getting more map control, getting the Roshan, the Aegis, all of that stuff. I am a big believer of that for the average pub game. I do think there are windows to like take the tier 3 tower and then go straight tier 4's throne. That's usually a very desperate situation. Like you've been stuck in your own base, you've been losing for 50 minutes, and then they screwed up, they dove way too hard, they wiped, and you're trying to force them to buy back. They're not buying back, so you're gonna go straight to the throne and try to take it. I'm okay with that, and I think there are times that is good. For a lot of games, you don't have to go that desperate. Like just build up to it, get the Rosh, get the towers, get the barracks, step by step, safe, pickoffs, siege, all that stuff, and then finish up with the enemy Ancient. If you want to see some of these scenarios broken down in a little bit more detail, I recently did a replay review stream where I opened a game, looked at the draft, and talked about various ways that each team could win, things to work towards, and then jumped to the late game and said, you know, okay, this team should be ratting. Oh, this just happened, so they should now siege. These guys got to push out this way. Here's how you hold this area to camp it, and here's your opportunity to look for a pickoff. Here's like a mistake that now leads to this. I did a whole bunch of different breakdowns like that. So if you want to see that, that'll be down in the description. I'll link it to the VOD channel, but I'll do more in the future too. So drop by the streams on Twitch or YouTube, whatever you like more. Feel free to ask these questions and join those replay analysis streams, usually on Wednesdays, where I'm sure we'll do more game breakdown to help you understand this flowchart and the nuances of Dota when you do different things. So that is it. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was helpful. Bye.